I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
This is the 400th episode special, and I'm here with Steve Cohen, podcast producer extraordinaire.
Hi, James. How are you? Yeah, time flies when you're having fun.
Hopefully, we'll be around for the next 100 or 500 episodes. We'll have a big party, so save the date when you realize we're getting close to 500. And Steve, I can't believe it's been a whole year.
Yeah, it's been
actually
amazing. It's been really, really terrific. 1,000%. You want to be in an environment where people have a mission, where they really, really want to do well. They're sincere about it, and so far, so good.
What would you say are highlights from the next 100 episodes? When we do the 500th episode, what are we going to look back and say? Episode 343, Tony Rock, Chris Rock's brother. I love this guy's comedy. He's not as famous, obviously, as Chris Rock, because Chris Rock, I think, hit national. There's a lot of reasons why Chris Rock hit it big, and Tony talks about it. Actually, it seemed like there was no competition between them. They all sort of grew up together. They had a strong family. They grew up in a bad area, but it's like they all became comedians. Their younger brother, Jordan Rock, is a good comedian too. And their cousin, Sherrod Small, who's been on the podcast, is great. So actually, I'll throw in episode 350. Episode 343 is Tony Rock. Episode 351 is Sherrod Small. I just want to give out two pieces of advice that they each gave me, but I would encourage everyone listening to the clips and the episodes because they're both funny and interesting. And yet, I mean, everybody's an example of how important it is. I don't know. There's a lot of things I've learned and added to my life by listening and really paying attention to each of these people. So I'll let you listen to them to see some of the things. But Tony Rock told me, when you're writing comedy, put down in big bullet points, like 4 or 5 of the main things that have happened in your life. And then put 4 or 5 bullet points underneath each one of those things, and then try to find the punchlines in there. And that was a great technique for writing. And I've been thinking about it ever since. Like, he said to me specifically, I can't believe you threw out all of your belongings and had nothing and lived in Airbnbs for 3 years and you've never told a joke about it. Like, what is wrong with you? So I've been doing his technique and working on it and crafting it. And
why don't you think you did? You know, I think you were reluctant to use your biography in your comedy.
Yeah, for a while, but I used some of my biography in my comedy. I don't know why. I think I'm coming to grips with it more. Like, and it's made my comedy a lot better, as you hopefully seen.
Much better.
And as opposed to just getting up there and telling jokes like every other comedian, I have like these decades of experience and like weird things that have happened to me. Why don't I tell more jokes about it? So now I'm starting to, and I just had this conversation about Tony Rock last night when I was talking to. I had dinner with 6 or 7 time guest on the podcast, Tucker Max, and we were talking about Tony Rock's advice, and Tucker was giving me some suggestions as well about how to take this minimalism and Airbnb stuff. But it was good writing advice by Tony.
But my jokes, I like to say something, of course, laughter, but I also like thought. I like, oh, interesting. I like, never heard that before. I like, he has something. I like all of that inside the laughter. Just getting laughter is nothing. That's not even
okay.
That's not a payoff to just get a laugh.
So watching you do stand up, I would say my own analysis might not mean anything. You have the concept, which is usually like a funny premise, and and there'll be a little bit of laughter.
Right.
But then you'll act it out in various ways. You'll kind of like hit it from different angles, acting it out. Like Barack Obama, you'll have like the girlfriends he dated that he would said he was going to be president. He's not going to be president. And then marijuana, like now you president.
Right.
And like, so you'll act it out like in different ways, hitting different angles of the thought of like, who's this like 20-year-old guy saying he's going to be president?
Right, because that's a realistic aspect of it. If you're a black guy living in the South Side of Chicago, and you tell your friends, I want to go into politics, I think I could be president one day. In the hood, in the South Side of Chicago,
that'd be funny.
You're gonna pass these actual people, these girls that are like, you out of your mind, you can't be no president, because they're living in what they see in front of them.
Right.
To be president, to be successful and be from the inner city, your vision has to be beyond what you see in front of you. Because that's why a lot of people get stuck in the hood, because they can't see past where they are. And to be a young black guy named Barack Obama and tell your friends, hey, I'm going to be president of the United States. I think that's hilarious.
Right. So the premise was funny, which is really interesting, because a lot of times people say, oh, premise and punchline. The premise doesn't have to be funny.
Right.
But I think your premise is you really focus on making them as funny as possible.
Premise has to be funny because it has to
kickstart the laughter.
Right. It gets them like, oh, let's see where he takes this.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm in. Like that's funny. That you have my attention with that. Now where do you go with it? So I act it out to give it a little physicality so they can follow it. But there's also, then I put the payoff in that he actually became president, and now there's these girls that are like, wow, he did it. Like, I can't believe he did that. And they got his boys from back in the hood like, wow, he actually, and they're still smoking weed on the corner. Like, he did it. I can't believe it. So it's the progression of the joke in how it follows the progression of Barack Obama.
And I think the act out, like you just doing it right there, like how you did it in a minor way just then, but like you taking on the girl's persona, you taking on the, the guy's persona, and you exaggerating it a little bit and dancing with it. Like,
it's Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor taught me that. Richard Pryor can stand on stage, one person on stage, and can make it look like it's 10 people on stage. Because he populates. He turns into the mother. He turns into the grandmother. He turns into the son. He turns into the preacher. He turns into the wino. He turns into the cop. So it's like, oh, this is a story. It's a play. It's a one-man play. So Richard Pryor taught everybody that. Everybody that does it, Richard Pryor taught us that.
And then Sherrod, which is episode 351, he gave the advice. He this was actually outside the podcast. He gave a lot of great advice in the podcast. But one time I ran into Sherrod in the street, and I had just done the live podcast with Ryan Holiday, and we had a full house. But then we were taking a 5-minute break and going straight into a comedy show. And I was trying to think, like, my podcast persona is obviously different than a comedy persona. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I ran into Sherrod, and I said, just right outside on a bench in the middle of this Broadway, I said to him, how do I go from, everyone's looking at me as this podcaster, and they're not used to seeing me doing stand-up comedy, which is like a different voice and a different, even if I'm telling stories that they know, I'm telling it in a more punchline kind of way. And he gave really good advice, which is always call out. Like, you can't hide from the audience. Always just call out what the audience is thinking. And so for instance, he said, just start off and say, long time no see. And everybody laughed just like that.
Right.
So
you shine a light on it rather than avoid it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so obvious, like, in retrospect, but it was true. And and then I watched his act that night, because he was on the lineup, and I saw how he did it. Like, if he said a joke that the audience didn't laugh at, he would call out, like, what's up with you guys? That I know that was funny. And then people would laugh. Like, if you always, anyway, it was interesting. So that's also good writing advice. 20 years, you've certainly had this huge arc of learning where sometimes you would be on a sharp learning curve. Sometimes you'd be probably disappointed in yourself and you'd have to figure things out. Like, I'm just curious, each step of the way, what you learned, how you realized you needed to learn it, what you failed at, and then ultimately you branched out to so many different things, like you said, to pay the bills. Yeah. And I'm just curious about the whole part. So, like, when you first started, what was going wrong? What kept you going?
I mean, I just was hungry from the beginning. I remember Greg Giraldo used to always say to me and Tone, because he used to always see us so excited at the clubs just because we got a spot. Like, that was a big thing for us. And he was like, man, I hope y'all never lose that enthusiasm, because it's just to see somebody that excited to just do these spots. He was like, it re-energized him into comedy too. It's like, it's addictive. And we were just always happy and ready to go.
And then when you started, you feel like, why are we starting it just at the bringer shows? We know all these guys. We know Chris. Why aren't we just like right on the stage?
We wanted to start from the bottom. We wanted to start from the bottom of the bottom. We wanted to know every aspect of this business. And we wanted to, just grow our own voice. You got to do a lot of different rooms to do that.
Yeah. I'm going to reel back a couple episodes. Episode 348, Jocko Willink, was his second time on. He's coming on again. He came on the second time for The Way of the Warrior. But what's so important with Jocko to me is Jocko and I are like, it seems like you couldn't find two more different people. And I always point that out to him. And he's like, oh, you'd be surprised. And he's always right. Like, one thing he really believes in, and it's a theme throughout his career and his writing and the message he delivers, is that take ownership of everything. And I strongly believe that too. If you blame others, if you're angry at others for not doing what you want them to do, if you are dependent on others to achieve the success you want, you're not taking full ownership. You're not. For Jocko, it's called taking ownership. For me, it's called choosing yourself. And turns out they're the same thing. And it's such an important theme. And it really turned out our disciplines were very similar, not in terms of when we wake up in the morning, but just in terms of like that taking ownership of things, not blaming others. You're the only one who's truly you have to rely on for your own success. So always a great podcast with Jocko, and so much I learn each time. Makes my life better every time he's on.
And even though you told him maybe don't call the book Dichotomy of Leadership, he is calling it. He was kind of like, sorry, James, I'm taking extreme ownership of this, and I'm calling it what I want to call it.
Which was funny when he emailed us later. Yeah. Like, we gave him this advice, like, and I'm always free with my advice, as you know. Like, in all of these podcasts, I'm always giving people ideas of what they should do. Like when we had Amy Morin on, I was giving her like 50 ideas of what to do, but that's the case with almost everybody we have on, and. So we gave the advice, or I gave the advice, that's a horrible title. And he's like, he sent us an email like, sorry, I'm doing it. And I bet you know what? I bet you it'll be a number one New York Times bestseller.
Definitely.
Like, I've read the book now. It's great. And I can't wait when's he coming back on?
He's coming, I want to say September 26th, or he's in New York, September 24th to 27th, so soon.
All right.
And so going into a couple thoughts here. I got asked by a kid on my kid's podcast the other day, Uncle Jake, because the podcast is called Ask Uncle Jake. Warrior Kid, ask Uncle Jake. Kid says, how do you know when you're doing the right thing? How do you always do it? And I talked about what you talked about earlier, which is, people have codes and companies have codes, right? Businesses have codes. Every branch of the military has a code. Teams, when you play at a sports team, they'll have a code that they've put together. The 10 Commandments is a code that people followed and lived by. There's all these, and that's what keeps people, what you used earlier is like, you don't want to talk about religion, but, we had some kind of level of codes for us as human beings, and now they're kind of getting lost. Well, if you have a code, if you write your own code, which I especially like, and that's what the book really encourages kids to do, is write your own code. And you can use this as a basis, but you write your own code and say, this is what I'm going to live by. This is what I'm going to live by. And if you have something like that you've written down, that you hold yourself to that standard, it's going to make it easier for you to hold yourself to that standard, as opposed to just having some unconnected thoughts in your head about what you might think might be right or might be wrong. When you actually write stuff down and you say, this is me, that has power.
It's interesting because, and again, it's like you referred to earlier when you were referring to veterans coming back, not only is there no, America considers itself a religious country, but really it's not. It's really a very secular country. And people focus from 9 to 5 on their job. And then, maybe they drink a little at night and then, watch TV, go to sleep, and then repeat. And then there's the other extreme, which you've dealt with, which is fundamentalist, religions that who knows what they're about. They're not really about religion. They're often more about money than a country like America, but in a weird way, in a twisted way. Yep. But then you look at the countries that rejected religion completely. So you have like Nazi Germany, communist China, the Soviet Union, where up to 100 million people were killed. The countries were so violent and authoritarian. And so you see that there is some benefit to having a real code. And what I see with these codes, like your book and many other books that I've looked at, there's almost this, what I'll call solo theism that's developing, which is, like you say, find your own code. It doesn't have to be the same as here. Like, not that you would disagree with this, but for instance, you don't talk, like for many people, integrity might be the first thing in their code. I'm not saying you're not for integrity. It's probably baked into these rules itself, but kind of deciding what's important to you, so you build that inner confidence. Like, oh, this person just attacked what's my core integrity, and so then you can act from that, from a real inner core, as opposed to just like wearing a mask and trying to please and just trying to survive and make money and doing whatever it takes. I think this idea of developing a code is really powerful. So how again, you say using this as a basis, but what's the first step if I wanted to develop my own code and it's slightly different from this? I could at first look at this and say, oh, I'll just take this one, which is good enough.
Yeah, I know, it's pretty close. Well, it's awesome to see, because as the first book, Uncle Jake shows Mark all these different codes from throughout history, and they're all militaristic codes. It's the samurai code, and it's the knights code, and it's the military, different militaries, U.S. militaries. He shows them all those codes, and says, "Look, you make your own code." And I think that's what you do, and I think it's very powerful. And what's really cool is I get little pictures on social media that parents will send me of their kids writing their own warrior code. And they'll have 6 or 7 from this, but then they'll have another one, be nice to my brother and sister, or they'll add in, take out the garbage on Mondays, or make sure I clean up the dog poo in the yard. Like, they'll add their own things that make it theirs, but it really does give you a solid foundation to stand with.
I'll skip to episode 353, Maria Konnikova. So she's been on a bunch of times. She wrote, obviously, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes. She wrote a book about the history of con men, which I found to be fascinating. She came on this time because, we're friends now, Maria, and we've hung out several times outside of the podcast. In particular, we've played poker, one-on-one poker together 3 or 4 times. because a year ago, she started off with zero knowledge of poker. Like she didn't even know the rules of poker. And then she thought to herself, a great idea for a book. And I like how people, I always been curious how people think of very simple structures that can result in very interesting, complex books. And the simple structure was, I'm starting out with something very interesting. A lot of people are interested in poker. I have no knowledge. I'm going to hire the best person in the world to coach me, and I'm going to see what happens in a year of coaching. And there's so many things that this is related to, like how do you learn something? How do you learn poker? What is poker? Is it possible for anybody to get good at poker? Was it possible for Maria to get good at poker? Like, how good would she get in just a year? And then it comes up against, I've had on a lot of people who talked about the 10,000 hour rule. I've even had on Professor Anders Ericsson, who developed the concept of the 10,000 hour rule, which is the idea that you need 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to get to be the best in the world at something. Well, Maria, after a year of study, is one of the best in the world at poker, I would say. She's won over $250,000 playing poker when she started from scratch a year ago. And so we talked about that, and we also talked about some of the results that we've had when playing one-on-one together. I used to play a lot of poker myself, and so she's great. I
was going to say, like, you talked about, like, how she came up with, like, ideas, but one thing that I found inspiring was she said, how do you know if you want to do a book or something? She says, if it scares me. And that I thought was really instructive, not to do, if it scares you, you're likely going to grow from it and other people will too,
Yeah. And, it's funny because that's come up a lot. And I've written that for years, that I won't hit publish on something unless I'm afraid to hit publish. But who were we podcasting the other day who said the exact same thing?
Was it, it wasn't Yuval Harari. It wasn't him.
Dan Schobel.
Oh, did Dan Schobel say that?
He wanted to do something that's make him uncomfortable. Is that him?
I feel like it was.
Yeah.
I feel like it was
Dan
someone.
Roth?
No, James. Is it James Frey?
Oh, James Frey.
Oh, yeah.
So James Frey, the author of A Million Little Pieces and the new book Katerina, says he does, and he's one of just whatever controversy he's ever had. If you just look at the raw writing skill, he's one of the best writers on the planet. And he also said he doesn't publish something unless he's afraid of unless he's afraid in some way, unless it makes him nervous. And so I think that's a common theme among all these people, that they challenge themselves. Really, you could almost call this podcast, instead of the James Altucher Show, you could almost call this the comfort zone.
Oh, yeah.
Because all of these people very consciously stepped out of the comfort zone. Like, if the comfort zone, there's nothing wrong with being in it because it's comfortable. But that's where everybody is, because most people would correctly want to be comfortable. You have to be a masochist to not want to be comfortable all the time.
Right.
But every single person who's ever been on this podcast has gone outside of their comfort zone, because you want to go to the place least crowded, which is also a quote that's appeared throughout this podcast. And that's where you find success. It's not going to be in the comfort zone where a billion other people are. It's going to be where nobody else is, and that's always outside the comfort zone.
Go out on a limb. That's where the fruit is. You know? Yeah. And
go out on a limb. That's another Steve Cohen quote.
But
have you sent me that quote?
If I haven't, I will.
I'm gonna put that on Twitter right now.
Okay, terrific.
And see.
I'm podcast famous and Twitter famous. It's really great.
Oh, I'm not giving you credit on Twitter. I use it to find a focus group to see which quotes get the most likes.
And while you're employing social media, I did think, like, I did interrupt you, which again, the students learning from the master about interrupting, but I did think you had a very interesting conversation with Maria about the 10,000 hour rule and her kind of disputes with Anders Ericsson. Like, she seems to. What did you conclude from the fact that she was able to learn poker, certainly in a lot less than 10,000 hours, and obviously becoming pretty damn good? I mean, she beat 230 people in the World Series of Poker.
Oh yeah, and by the way, there's no luck to that. Like,
yeah.
Here's what I think about poker people need to understand before we get into that. Winning any one tournament, there's a luck factor. You have to get good hands at some point, and sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you get unlucky when it's right
Yeah.
down to the wire. Well, at some point to win, you have to be all in, or someone's all in, and you have to win that hand.
Yeah.
So, and that boils down to the cards in the deck. But to win a tournament, any one tournament requires some luck. But to win any tournament requires skill.
Yeah.
Like you have to, a random person is not going to walk off the street, learn the rules, and beat 1,000 people in a poker tournament. Like there is a skill factor in winning a poker tournament. And Maria, I've played her now many times in poker. We've talked over hands. I see how her mind thinks. She is I played quite a bit of poker in my day. She's definitely a better poker player than me, and I see how her mind thinks. She analyzes like 5 layers deeper than me, and that came from hard work. But
did you think her being a PhD in psychology contributes as well? Right?
Yes. So I think in general about the 10,000-hour rule, and I've learned this, trying to get skillful at comedy. And deliberate practice, as Anders Ericsson describes it, is incredibly important. Do you need 10,000 hours? I'm not even so sure Anders Ericsson feels you need 10,000 hours, but I think he feels you need around there. Like his whole major study on violinists shows the guys with 10,000 hours are better than the guys with 8,000 hours, are better than the people with 6,000 hours. But I am a firm believer you can borrow your 10,000 hours, or you can borrow some of your hours from other areas of your life. So for instance, let's take stand-up comedy as an example. I've put in, thousands of hours as a public speaker. So I'm able to borrow from my skill set as a public speaker when I go on the stage. I've definitely spent 20,000 hours as a writer, which means I've spent 20,000 hours as a communicator. So I'm able to borrow from those hours for stand-up comedy. And I think Maria, for just doing a PhD and then doing a PhD in psychology, which gives you a kind of good sense of people and statistics and probabilities, she's able to borrow from those 10,000 hours to think very analytically on poker, and I think that's helped her quite a bit. So what helped me in poker when I was playing is that I had put in my 10,000 hours mastering games like chess and Go and backgammon, and I was able to borrow from those 10,000 hours I knew exactly what I needed to do to meta learn poker. Like I meta learned games, so I was able to apply that meta learning to poker. So I've meta learned communication, so I'm able to apply that not instantly. I still have to go on stage and do stand-up comedy. I wasn't able to do it instantly, but I was able to borrow from the other areas of communication and apply the general meta learning techniques of each area of communication to yet another form of communication. So I think that's important. And we all, by the way, all of us have spent 10,000 hours doing something. And when you do something new that you love, you can borrow from something else that you've loved, that you've put time in, and skip a lot of those hours. Now, the reason why Malcolm Gladwell and Anders Ericsson talk about the Beatles is they didn't have hours, or even Anders Ericsson's study of violinists, they didn't have hours doing anything else, right? Like the Beatles started when they were 15 years old. So it's not like they had 10,000 hours to borrow from anywhere else. They had to just put in the raw 10,000 hours of becoming the Beatles. But, people who learn things later in life, have opportunities to borrow those 10,000 hours and become good at many things that they're potentially interested in. Like if Jim Cramer were to write about sports, he's put in his 50,000 hours writing about finance, he'll be able to write about sports.
Sure.
I feel like all of your interests have combined into what we're going to talk about on this podcast, which was your next book that you were planning was going to be how you started off with essentially 0 skills at poker, and you were going to spend a year studying with the best poker player in the world and seeing how far it could take you in terms of learning. And then it's taken you so far that you've been making a ton of money, compared to the average salary. You've been making a ton of money playing poker now, just a year or so later, and you've even postponed the book.
Yeah. No one could have predicted that this was going to happen.
I could have predicted it.
Oh, thank you, James.
I knew you were there. Well, I played poker quite a bit 20 years ago. It was 1998, 1999. I played at, all the clubs in New York. And We played once. We played a couple of times, and you were already like just dominating. And so I could see you were going a long way. Not that I could really judge these things, but what was like the last tournament you played in?
So the last tournament I played in, I just got back from Monte Carlo for the European Poker Tour.
Sounds very exciting for a writer.
Yeah. It was actually my 1-year anniversary playing poker. So my first ever big tournament was Monte Carlo last year. So this was my 1 year on the poker circuit. It was very exciting for a writer. I never would have done anything like that otherwise. I mean, okay, so I didn't end up doing that well, but I played a tournament that has a $25,000 buy-in, which is more than my first salary in media when I started out in New York, which is just absolutely insane.
And what was the last tournament you made money in?
Well, so I did cash in one tournament in Monte Carlo for like $5,000, a little more, which was fine. But when you play a bunch and they're kind of big tournaments, I'm still negative for the trip. That was not a very good trip. The trip before was to Macau, and I came in second in one of the tournaments I played, and that was almost $60,000. So that was a good trip.
$60,000. So altogether, what are your poker winnings?
So over the last year, I have made a little over $200,000.
$200,000. And when you started, what did you know about poker when you first started?
Nothing. Zero. Literally zero.
Like, did you know the order of the hands?
No. I didn't know how many cards were in a deck.
Why did you decide, okay, I'm going to pick poker and do a book on this, on learning it from zero on?
So I wanted to write about luck, and we've talked a little bit about this before, kind of the role luck plays in our lives. Like, what is luck? How much of our lives do we control? How can you maximize what you can control? How can you learn to tell the difference between what's skill and what's chance? How do you actually make decisions that way? But that's not a book. That's a huge question that gets very existential very quickly. What are your beliefs about the universe? By
the way, there's a book I just saw recently. I think maybe it just came out about the science of luck.
Cool.
I don't know where it was. But anyway, I don't think that's what your book became about at all.
But I wanted a way into this question. And I read a lot. And when I'm doing research and starting on a new project, I just read for inspiration and try to figure out, is anything clicking? And one of the books I came across was John von Neumann's Theory of Games, which is the foundational text of game theory. So I had zero background in game theory. I mean, I have zero background in math. The last time I'd done any sort of math was in high school. So game theory was something that I'd never even considered, but someone said, you might look into game theory because game theory is all about kind of decision making.
Can you describe just what does the phrase game theory mean?
So game theory means if you actually kind of look at the world like a game where everyone has certain payoffs for certain decisions, given that, what is the best way for you strategically to make a decision so that no one can, quote unquote, exploit you? If you have a game theory optimal decision, that means that given all factors, the way that you are acting is the kind of best overall, over the long term decision for the situation.
Okay, so let me give you an example which someone asked me about yesterday, which I find to be very interesting. And first off, I do think you've dealt with game theory before because a book about con men is all game theory.
Right.
So the con man is playing a game, and the conner is playing a game.
This is true. I have never done it before. I had never done it in a formal way. Like I never really knew, how to apply that specific framework.
So here's a classic thing in business. You have somebody presents you, some godlike figure presents you with two opportunities.
Yep.
One is you have 100% chance to start a business. You in both cases, you could start a business. In the first case, case A, you have 100% chance of building the business and selling it for $1 million in a year. 100% chance you'll make $1 million in a year. In the second case, you have a 1% chance of selling the business in a year for $1 billion. Now, in a game theoretic sense, the case B is the better choice because the expected value is 1% of $1 billion is 10 million as opposed to 1 million. But I would argue case A is actually the one a person should take.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not wrong in thinking this way, even from a game theoretic point of view.
I mean, you have to keep in mind human psychology, right? And the fact that the 99% of the time when you make zero, are you the type of person who can afford that? And for most people, that's actually not the case, you actually would rather take the sure thing, even though it's less.
Right, because once you have the million, then you'll have the next opportunities to build the business that can make $1 billion.
Exactly. So we need to take that into account. Von Neumann would have actually agreed because this is what brings us to poker. He was a poker player, and I didn't realize that game theory came out of poker. He actually invented it in Monte Carlo.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was pretty cool for me to learn that. And he said, poker is a much better analog for real decision making than chess, than Go, than any of these other games.
I agree with that. Having played extensive, each one of those I've played for several years each. So Go, chess, poker,
and you became really good at them.
Yeah, all three. I mean, I won't say I probably played each one the same amount of time. And so in chess, ranked a master, and Go, I was about 1 dan, if you know the ranking system there. Poker, who knows? But I played about the same amount of time each. I would say poker is much more reflective of human decision making.
Right. And so that's what von Neumann said. He said, okay, this game, it's a game of incomplete information, right? Rather than chess, where there's always an optimal solution. You can see it because everyone sees the board. And so theoretically, there's always a correct move. In poker, there's no theoretically always correct move because there's private information. There are things that I know that you don't know. There are things that you know that I don't know. There are things we know in common. Then we have to play each other as well. What do I think you know? What do you think I know? And it gets into the human psychology side of it. It gets into bluffing and kind of trying to figure out how can I win even if I'm actually not in the best situation in terms of my cards. And von Neumann was like, this is life. This is actually the model for strategic decision-making I want to use. And he was advising the national government of the United States at the time. He was working on the hydrogen bomb. And he actually thought that poker, like solving poker, would help prevent nuclear war.
It's so interesting because he's probably correct. I mean, look at the 1950s.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union, which had everything going wrong, a backwards economy even then. Who knows what their nuclear situation was like, but they had such bravado.
Yeah.
They basically were playing as if they had a pair of aces in the hand, and for all we know, they had nothing.
Exactly.
But they mastered the game of poker in this case because they knew against Kennedy, a young inexperienced Kennedy, that maybe they could bluff their way through.
For sure. So this was actually, when I read that, I was like, this is really interesting. I want to figure out what this poker thing is, because it did seem to me like it would be a really good way of learning about decision making, about people, and that it could be a rubric for life, so to speak, right? That learning to play could make you much better at making decisions.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Garry Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. How about we go to episode 356? This amazing guest, Steve Cohen. Steve, I'm afraid, did I insult you on that podcast? I said that maybe you were on the spectrum of Asperger's. Were you insulted about that?
No, absolutely not. I was really honored to be a part of this.
I don't really think you have Asperger's. Well, maybe a tiny bit.
No, I do. I remember you had said something to me like, so-and-so thought he was weird. And I remember saying, like, okay, like my dad used to say, like, some people swear by you, some people swear at you, it's, but I think it was a great exercise, and I was very honored to be on it. And I thought just even I certainly didn't ask, like, I was appreciative, but I felt like it definitely, I thought about it in advance. I thought, like, what is my intent on coming on? Like, it was more about, it was about to say, like, hey, we're doing amazing things here. We're working really hard. We care about what we produce. And
but what? Yeah. So yes, having on the team, of course, has been an incredible experience. and now it's been a year. We're celebrating a year anniversary of it with this 400th episode almost. But what I was really interested in is just, you know, you had put in your 10,000 hours of producing media. Like, you were a producer on Good Day New York. You were a producer on, what was it, CBS
Early Show. I was in radio.
You were a producer in radio.
Yeah.
So you've put in your 10,000 hours of basically constructing entertaining and informative and educational programming. Like, Good Day New York is like the best morning news show in New York City now. I don't know if it was when you started or not, but you certainly made it that way and helped grow it.
Definitely helped. Yeah. No, and absolutely. I think that you have to use everything you can in your past to kind of move forward, and I don't think we should ever restrict ourselves, you know, in any situation. And it's inspiring when we have these guests on. We mentioned Tyra Banks or Maria Konnikova. They didn't allow themselves to be pigeonholed by what other people felt they could be like, you know, like they didn't allow the masses to convince them or groupthink to say, oh, you're not able to do this. And
right, like that's the one thing, like if I say, oh, we'll never be able to get Barack Obama on, if I were to, let's just make up a name.
Yeah.
Your response usually is, no, we'll get him. And
I do feel that way. I honestly do. And it's not bravado. It's not, I think we have an amazing program, and I think we will get people, and we'll hustle while we wait. And I do know, you know, that people come on, and I feel very, very confident about pitching anybody because you're very unique at this. You do your homework. You appreciate people. You're not obsequious of people, but like you're very informed and people enjoy it. So I feel good about saying, hey, come on this program. I have faith that you're going to do a terrific job, and they're going to be appreciative. And what I learned, and we talked about this in that episode, is and then in another later episode, the power of ask. You just have this amazing ability to network with thousands and thousands of people. You have networks within networks. Like, you have tiers of networks. So like, you'll know all, you know, the potential guests. I was going to call them celebrities, but it's not just celebrities. You'll know all the potential guests, but you also know their publicists. You know their agents. You know the book publishers. You know their best friends' wives, and you are networking constantly in a way that I'm just not capable of. I was saying the other day, Google is teaching me manners. So, for instance, I'll get an email from someone, and normally I just wouldn't respond. I'll say, okay, I sent an email, they sent an email back. But Google will kind of have these suggestions now at the bottom of have you seen that at the bottom of an email? Google will say, hit this button, and now you can write, yes, thanks. This is so awesome. That's interesting.
And so I realized, Google's sort of teaching me manners. And so I've been responding to a lot more people. But you always respond. You keep in touch with people. People tell me stories about you. Like, Steve showed up at my grandma's funeral in North Carolina on a day when he had like Kareem Abdul Jabbar on your podcast. Like, you always take that 5 extra, not the extra step, the 5 extra steps. And that's how everybody responds to you. And there was a lot of things we talked about on that podcast and the other podcast we've done together. We've done 3 podcasts overall. This is the 4th we've done together now. But in that podcast in particular, it's like you literally were speaking in quotes. And so I think we identified Pamela Rothenberg, who is also a producer on the show.
I want to thank everybody for working with him. You know, Jay, we don't have to thank. I mean, Jay, you know, but definitely Pam, Nathan, and Savannah, and Matt, and everybody. But our team they're great. So I'm overjoyed.
Pamela identified like the 58 quotes you said in 60 minutes that were like quotable, and then we had the idea we're going to put together a book, The Tao of Steve. So that's.
I think I'm honored, and I think that I do think a lot of my friends noticed it, and I thought you're very, very rare. I do. I think.
Did you have anybody call you who you were surprised you hadn't heard from in years, and you were like,
I did actually.
I heard you on the James Altucher show.
They were like, oh my God, I love James Altucher. I can't believe this is where you wound up. And I said, listen, let me know when you want to come down to a podcast. I'm Dwayne Reed, whatever you need, like let me know. But I think what's really, really nice is like you're not as and I'll insult you later, so it makes people, you know, to kind of leverage, to kind of balance the slate. But like I just think that it's rare. You have enough confidence to be very generous to say, wow, this guy I have is special. He's great. I'm happy to have him. And it's kind of like, one of my other favorite podcasts I thought was Ken Langone, who came on, and remember he, in his book, and in his personal life, he's very proud of the fact that he made 3,000 people millionaires at Home Depot.
Right.
And remember, I said to him, like, listen, Ken, like, a lot of people are reluctant to praise people because they don't want, they're afraid they might ask for more money. They're afraid that they're going to detract from their own credit or whatever reasons they have, or they're just selfish. And he said, Steve, those people are sick. So James Altucher, you are not sick, at least in that way.
Well, and Ken, so we'll skip to episode 366. Ken Langone, he was fascinating. So this is a guy who's a multi-billionaire, started Home Depot, among other things, started from nothing, has given hundreds of millions of dollars to charity. I mean, every hospital in New York is NYU Langone centers, and he just gave another $100 million so people can go to medical school here for free, which is great. He's really putting his money to work in ways that immediately and directly contribute to society instead of just blanket writing a check to a nameless charity. But you could see this is a guy who's been disciplined for 50 years. And he said, I'm not like you said, he's made 3,000 millionaires, but it's not just that. They became millionaires because of what he said. He's not a self-made billionaire, which everyone calls him.
Yeah.
He had the help of all these 3,000 people and many more. And he always says, or he was always saying, it's very important to have really good quality people around you. And we talked about that actually in private right before the podcast and then in the podcast. I think that's a valuable podcast to listen to. And he's featured in my upcoming book, Think Like a Billionaire. It's a very, very good guy. Well, here's what I want to ask you, and I know we're going to be skipping around the book a little bit, but you talk so much, and it's such a valuable lesson about how your main successes came from investing in good people. And we'll get
not only my main successes, all my successes.
All your successes, which is an extreme. People don't understand how valuable a lesson that is. Like one bad person could ruin a multi-billion-dollar company and has on many occasions. But if you have a team of good people around you, billions of value could be created.
Look, the human condition is spectacular. Nothing like it. As I said earlier, if there were no human beings on Earth, it would be a round thing with some water and dirt and nothing else. You mentioned Sam Walton and you mentioned Pete Cunningham. What happened? Here's what Kmart went bankrupt and probably going to go out of business now. Same business that Walmart copied. It's the biggest corporation in the world today in volume. What was the difference? People. Home Depot. You had Rickel, Pergament, Channel, Somerville Lumber, Heckinger's, Scotty's, all these regional chains all over.
You mentioned Homeco. You mentioned
Well, that was Pat Farah started. Pat's effectively one of the four founders. We say three, but Pat came a month or two after we started, and he was so much of the creative genius we had. Pat is, I shouldn't say was, he's alive and kicking and doing well. He owns a hamburger joint out in Lake Tahoe now. Busy Beavers or some crazy name like that. And we were four guys, and we were passionate about what we did. We liked each other very much. We had fun. We all had different skills and talents. And the rest is history.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about the main. I have a lot of questions about your people identifying skills, whether they're good or bad, and some of the near misses you've had. But with Madoff, is such a clear case where he obviously was an extraordinarily bad guy, but a lot of people still invested with him. When he was pitching you, it was almost like you had an instant reaction. Like, what was your gut telling you, and how did you see that? And I should mention also, you mentioned several times you're a poker player, which involves a lot of people watching.
Well, poker is as much studying people as it is studying cards. I would never want to play against Madoff because he was absolutely emotionless. Had to be. he knows he's going down when he's talking to me. And you'd have thought the sky was blue skies the rest of his life.
So what gave you, like, I couldn't tell anything one way or the other the one time I met him. What gave you kind of the red flag?
Well, let me ramble for a moment. Let me back up. If I were teaching a course in business school today, and I was told by the place I could only use one book, could only have one textbook, you won't guess what it would be. It would be the Bible. The Old and New Testament of the Bible, both. What I saw in Madoff when he pitched me that he was giving me something because he didn't have enough to go around for his other people that were around him 25 and 30 years. And in my head, I instinctively asked the question, how would I feel if I were one of those people that was an investor with him for 30 years and he's got this incredibly outstanding opportunity. This is what he's pitching to me, this fabulous opportunity, but it isn't big enough to give to all of his people. I thought, I'd be kind of pissed off. I'd kind of feel like, hey, that's not right. And so in the Bible, what's the golden rule? Do unto others as you have others do unto. That's simple. It was nothing profound. It was nothing earth-shattering. It was nothing like I had a major breakthrough in biotechnology or bioscience. It was a very simple, put myself in their place shoes.
Let's see. We've probably hit more than 15 at this point, Jay, right?
Yeah.
I'll go through a couple more. First off, they're all good. I can't even, that's why we're having so much hard time. Like, I want to mention Amy Morin, who's always a friend of the podcast. She's been on 4 episodes, but 2 of those episodes were part 1 and part 2, episodes 371 and 372, where she interviewed me.
Yeah.
I enjoyed being a guest on my own show. She did her homework. She really did us a favor. She didn't have to do it.
Yeah.
She came up here and interviewed me, and she's so smart. She wrote, of course, the best-selling book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And so I was really appreciative that she wanted to interview me on my podcast. By the way, I'll also mention Cal Fussman, episode 378, also interviewed me about minimalism. So that's a great one to listen to. It was fun for me to do. And then just all the podcasts have been great. You and I did, I forgot, we did this one too, talking about Choose Yourself. Those were bonus episodes. We have...
Which, again, it's the 5th anniversary of Choose Yourself. And
still, like, that book, I wrote it to be evergreen. Like, it wasn't topical. The philosophy still holds. Like, I reread the book to remind myself of the philosophy.
Terrific book. Really, really great book, And
then we had a fun time doing that podcast.
In your writing, you'll call yourself stupid a lot. Do you think that in your head? Like, will you think, I'm so stupid?
Yeah, because being smart in most you can't be smart in every area. So I think my first big problem was after the first time I sold a business, I thought to myself, I made a lot of money. That must mean I'm a genius because that's how society conflates money. I'm smart in everything now. And so I would just spread it all around. Like I'm great at this, I'm great at that. I'm going to invest in this. Everything I touch is going to turn to gold. And then I lost all of my money doing that. And so I had to really teach myself not to be kind of arrogant in that way and just remind myself all the time that maybe I'm smart in like 1 or 2 areas, but stupid in almost every other area. And be willing to learn all the time in every other area of life. And look, that's how, as just a typical example, that's how I invest. I only invest in a company if the CEO is smarter than me at that business, and if my co-investors, I have to have co-investors, if my co-investors are smarter and have more resources than me, because it tells me they've done more work than me, and the CEO is better than me at figuring out his business. So I don't need to think after that. Like, if it's the reverse, if I think, I'm smart, so this is going to be the biggest trend of the 21st century, I'm going to put all my money into it, then that's probably going to be a failure.
And then what about people? Because you'll say sometimes that you don't like people. And then...
I like you.
Thank you. I'm glad. But And then you have a interesting, and from what I've read and from what I know of you, you have an interesting relationship when it comes to humans. There's been times in your life where you talk about being lonely, and you have times when you reach out to people, and then other times where, like, you'll say you're shy if you go to a party. Tell me about that. How does all of that work?
Yeah, well, let me ask you as a therapist, because this is the same question I've asked my therapist. How many close friends do you think a person should or could have?
5.
I think about 5 is right. So sometimes I have less than that. Sometimes I have a little more than that, but like around 5 for close friends. And I think in general, I'm a real poor. It's hard to say I'm a poor judge of character. I think at times I've either hated people too much right away or liked people too much right away. So I realized, I wasn't as good a judge of character as I thought, one way or the other. And so I try really hard not to judge too fast. But like sometimes I'm just in a situation where I hate everybody here, even though I don't know anybody there. And maybe that's just a way to keep myself safe. I don't know. And then other times I'm also really introverted in the sense that like I could be social with my friends or in a group where I know a lot of people, but if I'm in a party or a situation where I have to get to know a lot of people, I can't do it for more than like a half hour to an hour, and then I have to recharge. So introversion in the sense that I don't mind being around people, but I have to recharge very quickly and often. And then in terms of shyness, I act. So I'll just say to myself, I'm going to play somebody who can just talk to anybody, and then I'll just go up to anybody and talk to them. And that's how I get it. But I'm just naturally shy, though, outside of that.
Right. Okay. Huh. And I think people would be surprised by that, right? Because you're James Altucher, you're your podcaster, and you put your story out there for millions of people. How can you not want to talk to people?
Well, but this is where stand-up comedy or public speaking helps, is that you get used to talking to strangers in a very public setting where all eyes are on you. So that doesn't necessarily help with shyness, except what I'll do is, again, it's using a micro skill in one area and to apply it to another area. I'll take that same performance-like skill, like being able to perform and having a commanding presence, and then I'll be able to go up playing that role. I'll be able to go up to people and talk to people. I'm going back and forth now across podcasts. Episode 374, Bishop T.D. Jakes.
Oh, he was unbelievable.
He was unbelievable, so inspirational. Obviously, a lot of differences between us. Like, he's a mega church reverend from Dallas. But we got along so well. One of the things you've said, and you repeated many times, is that, and I'm going to rephrase it or misphrase it, but don't let your past and your mistakes define your future success.
Right.
Now, you can learn from them, and that's a question, which is, how do you learn from them? How do you analyze them? But then how do you change so that your future, and this applies to entrepreneurship, we'll link it to entrepreneurship, but I'm really interested, like, how do you take right now and say, okay, my past has all these things that blocked me, that prevented me, that made me where I am today. I really want the future to be better. What can I do right now?
There's a couple of things. First of all, we have to make sure you don't plant good seed in bad soil. So let's do a soil test. What are you actually good at? A lot of times we are interested in things that we're not really good at. and to be able to evaluate whether I have adequate enough talent to be able to evolve in this particular realm or not is very important. And in order to develop or determine that, you have to surround yourself at least with some people with whom you can trust to be really honest with you about whether you really have that or not. For an example, I love music. I play the piano, but my love for music does not cover the fact that I don't play well enough to have made a career out of it. I may forever be a fan, but I'll never be a maestro. And understanding the difference between loving something that you enjoy listening at versus participating and evolving at a level that you may not have the talent for should not depress you, because just because I'm not great at that doesn't mean I'm not great at something else.
But if someone comes to you and says, well, Bishop Jakes, how do I don't know. I've been sitting in a cubicle for 30 years. How do I find that? And I just got fired. How do I find what my interests are that I'm good at? I don't know.
What I talk about in the book is I believe that most of life's answers lie within the human heart. And if you will just take a moment and look over your life and see what were the things that you did that when you did them, the gleam came in your eye and energy came into your spirit, and you couldn't go to sleep for thinking of creative ways to do them. Wherever those areas of interest lie that invigorate you, those are areas of passion. And passion and purpose are interwoven together in such a significant way that if you follow your passions, you will discover your purpose.
And I think, it's very interesting you say that, because I always look back, what was I passionate about at age 13 or 14 or 20, and how has it aged with me? So like you gave the example of the piano, maybe you can't be a maestro at the piano, but if it's an incredible passion for you right now, maybe you could write books about it, or maybe you could teach about it, or do commentary about it, or produce it. Who knows? So there's always ways to slice a passion other than being the maestro of piano.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for me, we have a huge music and fine arts department at my church because I love music.
And you produced music.
I produced music. I got Grammys in it. I surrounded myself with people who had that same common interest so that we could develop and evolve and do that. I think what's important for that person that's stuck in that cubicle is to understand that the cubicle doesn't define you. Just because it paid you doesn't mean that it defines you. And sometimes it betrays the greater gifts that lie inside of you.
Let me ask you this. Sometimes I get along with a lot of these guests.
Yeah.
And I'm always assuming we're naturally getting along. Like, oh, it's just my new friend. But of course they're going to be charming. They're going to be on my podcast, and all of them have the skill of charm. But like, I really feel like
not all of them. Yeah, I think I could tell. Like, I think we could tell. I mean, I
like
don't
if we went down to Dallas and called up TD Jakes, you think we could just stop by and say hi?
Yes, absolutely.
That was a great episode.
So we're going to be there soon. And I think we talked about this, but like Rob Corddry, I just felt like
Rob
you
Corddry,
guys are Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly in Step Brothers. It was like, did we just become best friends? It was unbelievable.
Rob Corddry, episode 383. Let's listen to that clip. But we were like best friends in that.
100%. He couldn't like you more.
With improv, I imagine you're going into a sketch and you have to fully be there. You can't think of how the audience is responding to you.
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, you can't help but think about how the audience is responding, because especially in comedy improv, like the laughter is oxygen. But when you're on the right track and on the wrong track, or on the wrong track based on the audience's reaction. But the improv was an exercise in listening. It was a very good life exercise, as a matter of fact. Like, I think I listen better in life. Like, I'm a better husband because of improv.
That's interesting, because it's like let's say your wife says something, does your brain suddenly branch out? Okay, I have 12 choices here. One's going to be funny. One's going to piss her off.
Yes. Just yes and. That's what you do. Yes and. Rule number 1 of improv. Yes, honey, and.
And then what's the second rule?
What do you mean?
I always see yes and as the first rule. What's the second rule?
Oh, the second rule is never kill your scene partner, I think, which you always do. You always kill them because it's funny. And the third rule is my favorite. This one was taught to me by Matt Walsh of the Upright Citizens Brigade. He was my third level teacher. And this, I think, is the secret to their success, and also something I've just tried to do in my life outside of acting as well, which is your main job is to don't worry about yourself, make your scene partner look good. And if you do that right, you will look good by default. So it kind of, it gets you out of your head in a way. Like you don't have to worry about it. It makes you less self-conscious and more keyed into the person you're improvising with.
That's interesting. So I could see that working in many areas of life, from relationships to business to even acting. And then Seth Godin, episode 375, so smart and intelligent. I always listen to every piece of advice Seth gives me. He's like a wise philosopher in today's day and age.
He's unbelievable. And when you think about how smart he is, it makes me think of like in Princess Bride, where Wallace Shawn says, Socrates, Plato, morons. He's a bright guy. And what I remember from that podcast was you said to him, he's written so many books and he's very rehearsed. He's very careful about what he says. Words matter to him, and every word he says, it's unbelievable. But I'm a huge fan of his. But I liked what you said to him. Well, okay, Seth, who are your fans? Who is your fans? Who are your people? And we'd love to have him back for This Is Marketing. But he said, my fans are dissatisfied. They're thirsty. They're and I think that they're the kind of people, he phrased in a certain way. He said they're dissatisfied, they're thirsty, and they're generous, and he explained it. And he talked about how they want to be able to say, hey, you should read The Purple Cow. It will really help you about marketing. Or
Purple Cow is one of my favorite business books. And it's not just about business, actually. It's about how you could live your life. It's about getting out of the comfort zone.
Yeah, so thanks again, Seth. We appreciate it.
Actually, his books, Purple Cow, Grace, some of his not more known books, even like the one about Grace. I don't know. All his books are worth reading.
An incredibly bright guy.
Then he had the book. You can't even buy it. It's like 500 pages. It's like a huge coffee table book, but it's like a collection of his thoughts. It's so interesting. You've said it over and over. Try to figure out who your audience is.
Exactly.
And we spoke about this before the podcast, audience selection versus audience development. Don't try to educate 1 million people to be your fans. What's the audience you really are aiming for that you could really focus a message to that they're going to listen to? And how do you select your audience? Like, what's the audience you're going for?
So if I was going to say this in 6 words that people could write down, it's really simple. Choose your customers, choose your future. If you're a freelancer and you have bad clients, you're going to be a bad freelancer. If you're a freelancer, you have great clients, you're going to get better clients. It goes on and on and on. If you're a doctor, it doesn't matter what it is. Choose your customers, choose your future.
And who are your customers?
My customers are people who are thirsty, dissatisfied, and generous.
What do you mean by generous? Because I like that phrase.
So I find the whole Ayn Randian Atlas Shrugged thing complete nonsense. It's the, fine for 14-year-olds, but we had plenty of things we did when we were 14 that we don't take seriously. This idea that you need to be selfish is that some sort of way to win, and that we should keep track of bank balances as some sort of indication of our worth makes no sense to me. What it means to be generous is to say, I'm going to expend emotional labor, which is not the physical labor of digging a ditch, but the difficult labor of confronting my fear, putting aside my short-term needs to help other people get where they're going, because I believe if we can go to that place, all of us will benefit, right? Zig Ziglar said if you help enough other people get what they want, you'll get what you want. I just like the first half of that. If you just help enough other people get what they want, period. That if we lived in a community where that's what was going on, I think it would be a good place, because in the connection economy, connection creates value. Who connects to us? We're connected to people we're generous to. We're connected to people we see, because people want to be seen. People don't want to be lonely. They don't want to be objectified. They want to be seen. So my ideal reader, listener, whatever, is somebody who looks at this opportunity and says, oh, I got a mic, right? Tell me how to be generous to the people I care about. Because if we can do that, it becomes a virtuous cycle that doesn't tear everything down. It builds everything up.
Because I think under the undercurrent of a lot of what you're saying is those 5,000 people say they're not, that might be the audience you're targeting, but there's something else it seems like you're targeting, which is you want to create content that's shareable. So it's easy for you to create content that those 5,000 people will like, and they'll consume it because they've been fans of yours for years and they've read all your books, and they'll say, oh, here's another Seth Godin thing, I'll buy it. But you want to kind of always find that you do push yourself to say what's new, so that they can say to their friend who might not have heard of you, hey, you have to read this. This will change your life.
Pretty close. I've said I want to be judged not by my work, but by what the people who learned from me taught other people. So I don't want people to tell other people about me. I want people to teach other people. And if I don't get credit, it's fine with me. That second order teaching shows me that I did a good job.
Yeah, and it's related to all this math, like about network effects.
Right.
So for instance, a simple example of it is, if you want to use LinkedIn to get a job, you don't go to your first level connections, you go to your second level connections, your weaker ties. And they're the ones that are most likely to help you find a job. In part because A, there's more of them, but I don't know what the reason for this network effect is, but somehow if your weaker ties appreciate what you're doing, kind of the connections of your connections, then that shows you're having an impact.
It's even cooler than that. So the people who run LinkedIn told me that more than 70% of their revenue comes from things you don't even see. Not from in-mail and stuff like that. It comes from recruiters paying LinkedIn to help them find people like you. The best way to get a job using LinkedIn is to be amazing. Because if you are amazing and you keep doing amazing work, people will come find you. That's what makes it work. So the reason that second order effects are better than first order effects is first order effects are based on the connection we have with people on an emotional level who know us. There is shame associated with not helping us. There is status associated in this interpersonal relationship with helping us. That disappears for second order effects because there's nothing at stake other than, wow, something amazing is happening here. I better tell other people. So that's the part that people miss. It's what they miss about SEO. It's what they miss about LinkedIn. It's what they miss about Amazon, which is the place to do the work is not in the hustle. The place to do the work happens long before the hustle, where you are the person they want to find. If you become the person they want to find, you don't have to spend a lot of time getting found.
I totally agree. I think the whole concept of SEO feels very fake to me, because if you have nothing to say, there's nothing to SEO. But for you, how do you, and this sounds like a naive question, but it's a question I want to know the answer to, and maybe other people. How do you become amazing? I mean, obviously there's sit every day and work at your craft. Like, you write your blog post every day. You do this podcast now on a regular basis. But if you could formalize it, how do you become amazing?
Right. And that's the essence of the work. And so we've spent a bunch of time talking about some of the surface stuff, but the work is the emotional labor of confronting our fear. You can't make it go away, but you can dance with it. And we live in a culture with more neophiliacs than ever before.
What's a neo?
Neophiliac, people who like the new. And so something's new now for 4 days, not 4 months. Used to be a movie would run in the theaters for a year. Now a movie runs in the theater for 2 weeks, and we say, that's old. What's next? So given that there's so much neophilia, there's a demand for new. That's good. But creating new is really hard, because what everyone wants to do is buy a dummy's book, see the structure, follow the rules, do the bullet points, and be done, knowing it's going to work. But all of the breakthroughs, all of the magic happens when you do something that might not work. And it's the things that might not work that are generous. That's where art lives. That's where innovation lives. That's where the magic happens.
So let me think of that. The things that might not work, that's where the generous is.
Right.
Of course, Roy Niederhoffer, it was so great to meet him as normally I don't have business guys on. Now, you could say Ken Langone's a business guy, but, Home Depot is something that's affected basically every person in the United States and around the world. But Roy Niederhoffer is a hedge fund manager, has managed money for 30 years maybe. And both Roy and I have a common ground where we've both worked for his older brother, Victor Niederhoffer. So we had a lot to catch up on and talk about. But he gave a lot of great opinions about not only investing, but the economy and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and just, excellence in general. So that's a great one. Here's a clip from that. We'll do the Bitcoin clip.
When I heard about Bitcoin back in 2011, I remember exactly where I was. It was like I was hit by a bolt of lightning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, and I opened a copy of Wired magazine. There's an article called The Rise and Fall of Bitcoin. It had gone to $20 and back to $3 at that point. And I read about this thing that was kind of money that had a fixed supply. And I said, wow, this is the solution to the great vice of fiat currencies and even asset-backed currencies like the denarius in Rome. Governments always reduce the value, except if the supply is fixed.
And supply here, you're saying, has to be fixed because the software and
exactly.
Software we've seen around for a decade.
Exactly. 21 million, that's it. No more Bitcoin. So I bought early, and I have been a tremendous proponent of Bitcoin since. And I think there's something very special about cryptocurrency. Now, I love blockchain too, and I think that's a revolution in itself. But cryptocurrency has a very specific quality. If you think back to the oysters, what would have happened if you kept your money in oysters? Well, if you remember, Indians used to keep wampum, that was literally oyster shells. So they had some inkling of it having a fixed value. What about if you kept your money in gold from 1900? You'd basically have the same amount as you had in 1900, right? They say for 2,000 years, gold has purchased a good suit of clothing. And that's basically the case for the last 120 years. But if you'd invested in the stock market in 1900, you'd be richer than Warren Buffett. So how do I reconcile these two things? I'm talking about a fixed supply asset like gold and oysters or like Bitcoin as a good investment, yet you would have done much better to be in dollar fiat currency. Even with the 99.95% devaluation, you're still one of the richest people in the world. The difference, and the reason that Bitcoin is different from any other fixed supply money that's ever been created, is that it has associated with it a financial ecosystem as robust and powerful as a fiat currency. So you can buy stocks with Bitcoin. We call those ICOs. You can lend Bitcoin. You can lend at 9 or 11%, and there's a forward rate, there's a yield curve. You can trade futures. Soon there'll be a full-fledged derivatives market, an options market.
Could you argue gold was always like that, though?
I'm not so sure. I think for most people, if you have ingots, you're kind of stuck with sitting on them with your shotgun or keeping them in a vault. And of course, transporting them, if you do the math, a suitcase worth of gold is about $1 million. But if you've got $10 million to transfer, they're not going to let you on a plane. So you're kind of stuck. And so Bitcoin has this fungibility aspect where you could send it from place to place for almost nothing these days in almost zero time, a few tens of minutes.
Do you ever get worried that, blockchain as a technology is starting to be used by almost every bank, Walmart, UPS, even the central bank is, Federal Reserve Bank is looking at uses of blockchain. Do you ever get worried about that the underlying technology could be separated from the use of blockchain as money, which is called Bitcoin?
I do. I think the digital currency is different from cryptocurrency. I think a US dollar-linked cryptocurrency would be an interesting policy tool because it would enable negative interest rates. So if you think about the problem of the government wanting to stimulate the economy by having not 0% interest, but negative rates of interest, where if you put your money in the bank, they give you 1% or 2% less every year. Well, people would say, well, why do I put my money in a bank? I'll just keep my cash in my safe and I'll just sit on it. I'm not going to earn minus 1%. I'd rather earn 0 just by having it in my safe. Well, if all your money is in cryptocurrency, they can actually just take it away from you. So having a US dollar or reserve currency that's in a digital currency format allows central banks and the government to do that. So there may be a reason that they have it. The problem is they're still subject to the same vice of all governments, which is making too many of these negative interest rate bit dollars or whatever one would call them. So it becomes very dangerous to hold them because they can just make as many as they want. Bitcoin and the other major cryptocurrencies are algorithmically not going to be, there will be no more extra supply.
But the reason often the Federal Reserve devalues, or the government in general has been in favor of devaluing, is to, like you say, pay for obligations that they made in the past, whether it was Nixon trying to pay for the Vietnam War, or the bailout with Bernanke and government officials then. So how would you manage monetary policy with a central bank linked to cryptocurrency?
Well, that's a very interesting question. How would a government behave if it had to behave like any other business? And the answer is they probably would spend a lot less money and make a lot less promises. And it would probably change who people vote for. It would be, to me, and again, what interested me in the beginning was, wow, this is really a different way of thinking about money and government. So I think the world would be a very different place, and in my view, a better place.
Do you think governments in general, countries in general, have a tendency almost to trend negatively? Like the Roman Empire was around forever, but ultimately they trended in the direction of their money. And I think every country throughout history has done that. Do you think there is a way for them to say, oh, let's look at this new type of monetary policy, spend less money, which is different than we've ever done in every year of American history? Do you think that mindset is possible?
I think in a democracy, it may not be possible, because it would be very easy to vote for people that are going to make promises that are more easily understood. Like, don't worry, we're going to make good on all this obligation that we told you we would do. And the person saying, no, there's not enough money to do that is not going to, no one likes a negative candidate. So I think there's probably a structural reason why we will never have that in the United States or in any democracy. It's too painful.
So what's your, are you guys investing in it? Are you looking at patterns in big crypto the same way you looked in patterns in other systems?
So interestingly, we have done a lot of work in many different facets of crypto, ranging from mining and arbitrage and HFT, position trading, ICOs. And then we have our existing models, which have never seen a cryptocurrency. And we found something very interesting, that our existing models work, that the same cognitive biases that people have when they trade soybeans in Google and US Treasury bonds are present in the way people trade crypto.
And where just as a final thing, what books could people read to learn more about these cognitive biases that you've been modeling?
So I have two books that I love to recommend and give to people. One is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And in it, he really goes, I think it's the greatest book on trading. Doesn't have much to do with trading until you start thinking about it as a metaphor for trading. And then every single page has something to do with trading and living more effectively as well. So I'd recommend that. And another book that I love, which interestingly was written by another Harvard neuroscientist. He preceded me in the lab I was in, which was run by a guy named Steve Coslin. The most famous grad student when I was there in the 80s was this guy named Steven Pinker. And
Enlightenment Now is most recent.
Exactly. So even back then, Pinker was a superstar, and he's one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And his book, The Blank Slate, also has some very interesting ideas that I think are worth thinking about and counter consensus.
Okay, I'll say, first of all, again, all 100 are great. We've talked about so many episodes. Yuval Harari, we always say so-and-so is the smartest person ever. Yuval Harari actually is the smartest person on the planet.
Wow. That it's really, he's, again, I would say with somebody like Michio Kaku, I think if you're really, really smart, you could make it seem very simple, and that was what I found so impressive about all three of his books. You had him on for Sapiens, and then this one is 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And of course, he wrote Homo Deus, but just incredibly bright and, just conversational.
Such a nice guy. And also
curious.
because he's been on before, we started off as like knowing each other and friendly.
He appreciated the first interview you did. So,
obviously in Sapiens, all through all three of his books, he talks about the whole history of the human species in this very unique way. And so the first, so by the way, just the facts in those books that he describes and the way he talks about them, it's interesting to listen to the podcast and read the books and so on. But I was also interested, how do you come up with this stuff? Like, how do you think about things? And so him describing his thought process about how he comes to certain conclusions was very interesting. And then, of course, his 21 lessons that we need to think about now for the 21st century. That's fascinating. We talked about quite a few of those 21 lessons. But before we get into the clip, not the main takeaway, but one of the takeaways, which I've been doing, we start off the podcast and he's telling me he doesn't have a cell phone, a smartphone. And I couldn't believe it. Like, how do you call people when you're outside if you don't have a smartphone?
Yeah.
And he says he doesn't. And I'm like, well, how do you meet people? Like, if you're arranging to meet, well, we arrange to meet beforehand and then we just meet.
Yeah.
And so we just did that podcast 9 days ago. This is now day 8. I've been doing what he was doing. I have not taken the phone out of my house since that podcast, and it really does make a huge difference in my life. Like, I can't say I haven't missed it, because I've had, like, it's like when you stop eating carbs, like suddenly you want to eat carbs like incredibly. There's this incredible craving, and that's related to the dopamine hit you get from, just touching the phone and getting an Instagram like and so on. But I think it's given me more time to think, more time to read. When you look at the actual amount of time you spend on your phone, you can't notice it until you no longer have it. And it's incredible. So I'm on day 8. We'll see how long I can go, but I'm doing Yuval's strategy.
How long do you think you could go?
I'm going to try to go forever.
Wow.
I'm on day 8 and I haven't, maybe.
And you asked him about that because he's very big. He spends a lot of time meditating every day. He does like a 30-day retreat every year.
60-day, he said.
60-day, wow.
So he spends 2 hours a day meditating. And then he also spends, he said, several hours a day reading and then several hours a day writing.
Yeah.
So you can't, and then he has he's married. He spends time, on his relationships. You can't do that if you're
a professor.
The average amount of time people spend on the phone it's hard to believe, but is basically 4 hours and 40 minutes a day is the average American spends on the phone, on their smartphone. And how are you going to do that if you're going to meditate and read and write and actually accomplish your life goals if you're on the phone for 4 hours and 40 minutes a day? That adds up to something like 5 years in your lifetime.
That's unbelievable.
And that's without sleep. So it's really more like, 15 work years of your lifetime. That's your whole life is on the smartphone. And this is your point in the book that free will itself is kind of a myth. I mean, we already know that a lot of cognitive biases that we have no control over shape our decisions, but we still think we have largely more control over them than they have over us. But your point is that with data, we'll be able to analyze, what music triggers what parts of the brain, what images trigger what, the sales or greed parts of the brain, and so on. So that the first level is kind of data used for advertising, but the second level might be data used for much more insidious decision-making.
Yes. If you get to know a person well enough, if you get to know a person better than that person knows himself or herself.
And that's even on the inside, how the brain works and everything.
And, people know so very little about themselves, both on the biological level, certainly, how many people really understand their brains, but even on the psychological level, on the mental level. We have an entire profession of therapists who are just trying to help us get in touch with ourselves because it's so difficult. And if you go and practice something like meditation, then at least when I started practicing meditation, I was struck by how little I know. I know almost nothing about my mind. And, we have this myth of free will, which in a way serves as a curtain that hides the reality about ourselves, that actually dampens our curiosity. Because if you really believe in the myth of free will, my desires reflect my freedom. I chose these desires. I chose everything that I do. Then you know everything. You understand yourself. You understand your desires. You know where they are coming from. There is nothing to investigate. But once you realize, no, my desires don't reflect my free will. They reflect all kinds of processes on the biological level, on the psychological level, which I don't understand. Then you start being very curious about yourself. And I think that, in the 20th century, in throughout history, this advice to people, get to know yourself better, this was always very good advice, that you don't really know necessarily why you want this or why you want that. But for all of history, though you had all these Socrates and Buddha and Freud telling people, know yourself, if you said, nah, I can't be bothered about it, you didn't have competition. Still, you were a black box to the rest of humanity. So it wasn't such a disadvantage not to know yourself. But now in the 21st century, what you need to realize, you have real competition this time. It's not like in the days of Socrates. If you don't get to know yourself better, there is somebody out there who is right now trying to hack you. And not just one. Amazon is trying to hack you, and Google is trying to hack you, and Coca-Cola is trying to hack you, and the Russians, and the American government, and the Chinese, they are all trying to hack you right now.
Right, and there's different layers. So for instance, Amazon's trying to hack you in the sense of, okay, Yuval bought this, and our AI and our data about people similar to Yuval show that he will probably buy this next.
Yes.
And so that's what they'll start to show you. And then maybe 5 years from now, they'll send it to you yesterday what you were going to buy tomorrow.
Yes.
What's the next insidious level of that? So that's kind of almost a good thing. When does it start to get darker?
Well, it's first they sell you a product. And it really started with selling products, all these methods. But now these methods are also being used to sell you politicians, which is a bit more insidious than selling people products. The next step is to start manipulating your desires instead of just fulfilling them. Yes, he wants this, but we can actually make him want that instead. And then it really becomes kind of the twilight zone. That if you realize that actually my desires, they do not reflect my free will, they reflect a more and more sophisticated system of manipulation, then what can I trust if I cannot trust my own inner, most authentic desires and wishes? And again, this was a problem throughout history. Throughout history, if you really looked hard, you would have realized that many of your desires, they come either from biological bugs or from cultural manipulations and propaganda and so forth. But still, you were in a privileged position. Nobody out there could really understand you better than you understand yourself.
So you're saying like things like nationalism or to an extreme fascism or on the other side liberalism or before that religion were different man-made stories to potentially take control of your free will in a way that the kings or whoever could control. But now it's with digitalism, for lack of a better word, it could get deeper. They actually can get inside of you in ways that you can't say no to.
Exactly, simply because they understand the biology better. They understand the brain better. They have better devices to monitor what's happening there, and they are going to have better devices to change what is going on there. So what you tried to do 1,000 years ago with the priest preaching from the pulpit, you will be able to do in a far more invasive way in 10 or 50 years with all kinds of brain-computer interfaces and direct biological interventions. So it's not new.
What do you mean by direct biological intervention?
As you understand the biological system better, you can, like with every system, once you understand how the system works, you can start changing it in more and more ways.
So, we talked about William Shatner, talked about Tucker, and again, all 100 have been great. Like, I feel like each podcast again, I don't do the podcast to be a journalist. I'm not trying to report on events. I'm not trying to get my opinion over on them. I'm trying to make. Let me drink water.
But I'll tell you, I'll interrupt in that I spent 20-something years in TV and radio and journalism, and I don't think, when you make that disclaimer, I still think you're just naturally curious, and you're there you don't come in with an agenda perhaps, but you come in with a curiosity that brings the best out of these people.
Well, I think I do have a little agenda, which is a selfish agenda. I just want to make my life better. Like, this podcast is a great way to call up people who I am inspired by, and I get to ask them as many questions as I want to make my life better. And then and I'm also thinking of the listeners, what's going to make their lives better. So I'm always thinking, someone's driving into work or they're at their gym and they're listening to this. I want them to think, that one thing this person just said just made my life better. I want to share it with my cousin or wife or husband or whatever, because it'll make their lives better too. And so I'm always thinking about that. And again, everybody's been great. I've skipped over a good 70 podcasts here. They were all amazing, from astronaut Mike Massimino, Frank Oz, who plays Yoda, to Brad Meltzer, the thriller novelist, to John Ronson. Gosh, so many people. PJ O'Rourke. I could just go on and on. They're all. I've learned something. We actually don't air a podcast unless I learn something from it. So everybody's been amazing. But thanks to all the listeners for hanging in there. Another 100 episodes. Hopefully, we'll be around for the next 100. The 500 episodes, we'll have a big party. So save the date when you realize we're getting close to 500. And Steve, how's your? I can't believe it's been a whole year.
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been really, really terrific.
Year's a long time to work someplace.
1,000%. No, I tell people this, and one of the things I like about our podcast, like, it's authentic, and I feel like everything we said when we met, has been coming true, and it's been terrific. I think, like Chase, the right relationship is everything, and you want to be around really smart people who want you to do well, not just people who don't want you to screw up. But I think for the listeners out there, like, you want to be in an environment where people have a mission, where they really, really want to do well. Like, they want to learn, and they're sincere about it. And if they are, they're going to be good to work with, so far so good.
What would you say are highlights from the next 100 episodes? What would you like when we do the 500th episode?
Yeah.
What are we going to look back and say?
I think that's terrific. Yeah, we have to be like vision ahead and say, okay, like, how are we going to get to space and do these things? I think I'm definitely one of the most successful people in Hollywood was Mike Ovitz, and he's coming up, and he's writing a book called Who is Mike Ovitz? And I think he's a really fascinating figure. We expect to have Reid Hoffman on, who, started LinkedIn and PayPal, and we love his podcast, which is terrific. So very, very excited about that. We're going to have Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is in the mold of Amicio, and, like you said, Carl Sagan. So I'm definitely very excited about that.
Let's say the ones we don't know, and without
who would we
without
like to,
naming any names, but just in general, where would you like to see the type of guests and the category of guests? Like, where would you like to aim?
I think what I really enjoy is, like, about doing this is, I think we all have to be curious, and do you want to learn something? I mean, in news, people used to say, if, news is when somebody's trying to hide something. Everything else is just advertising. So in our case, we want to have stuff that's different and unique and interesting, and that, only people could listen to you would hear it. And we've talked about the skill stack before. And again, I'm relatively smart. My relatives think I'm smart. Like, I've seen a lot of interviewers, and you have a unique skill stack. You know chess. You've been in business. You've written books. You've failed and failed and failed. But and so I don't think very many people can do the interviews you could do, and the range and the depth, and bring that kind of intensity. So like, anywhere I would want to work, I want it to be a privilege and a responsibility. No, it's not a reward, and we take it seriously. So, and we have fun.
I'll add a little. I think we should do more podcasts without guests.
Yeah.
Like we did the podcast about the Beatles and their rooftop.
Yeah.
You don't have to know anything about the Beatles because we kind of described,
Yeah.
we did it about their last rooftop concert, their last concert, the last time they appeared together at all. And it was their rooftop concert in London. I thought that was a great podcast and I got great feedback on that.
And I remember that day because one of our guests wasn't there. And I remember saying to you, James, it's like they say, there's alive time and dead time. Dead time is if we say, oh, blah, 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 it didn't come. He's the worst, screw it, and we complained about it. But alive time is like, okay, here's where we are. Let's make the most of it. And we did make lemonade out of those lemons, and it was terrific. And
I think if there's any topics that listeners want me or Steve and me to talk about, tweet them to me at jaltucher, and we'll talk about them. I think there's a lot of interesting topics that have a general audience, and there's a lot of topics that I kind of want to talk about. So I think we'll probably have more of a blend of that in the next
I can't wait.
100 episodes, and I think it will probably tie more things into my Instagram account, which is at Altucher. And in any case,
thank you. I just want to say thanks to everybody for listening and all the great feedback we're getting, or even not so great feedback. We really appreciate it. And I, like I said, it's a privilege and a responsibility. We're having a lot of fun. And please feel free to reach out to us at any time or come to one of the podcasts.
Yeah, you go. A lot of times we tweet out you could come because we could do it on the stage at the Comedy Club in honor of. And if you don't subscribe, please subscribe because it helps us know that we should keep doing this. So please subscribe to the podcast. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.